There is a sense of quiet on the streets that we have not seen for a long time in Baghdad. But there is also a big question mark in the shadows of every alley. James Glantz, The New York Times, Baghdad Bureau Chief.
Welcome back to Inside Iraq. Our discussion today, what lies behind the perceived security improvement in Baghdad? We are talking to three experts. James Carafano, the kidnapping keeps going on. The decapitated bodies, we see them all over Baghdad. Definitely they are not in the 300 and 400 range as they used to be several months, but still you see 20, 30. So how can we talk about improved security when actually people do not cross from one community to the other?
Well, that's a good question. Obviously, things aren't there yet. I think what's very interesting is in this discussion, we actually agree on an awful lot, and that's that what the progress has been made is not coming from the top down. It's not really emanating out of Baghdad. It's really coming from the bottom up. It's people really finding local solutions. So the question is how do you keep momentum going on and you continue to improve security, but at the same time, you don't want to have progress come from the bottom up and people just solidify into separate blocks, but kind of come together at the top. So it seems to me that's where the real challenge is now. It's not just to keep the momentum going and keep improving the security, keep going after the militias, keep reducing the threat from the insurgents, but to actually have that kind of coalesce into a national movement as opposed to just a bunch of groups looking out for themselves. Because if that happens, then you'll continue to see the kinds of things you're talking about, the level of violence and violence and tit for tat back and forth between groups. And as long as you have that, we're never going to have the kind of peaceful, unified Iraq that I think everyone's looking for.
Fareed, the way James Carafano laid it out, are we talking about months or years? Or are we talking about permanently stationing 130,000 American soldiers in Iraq only to get some security?
Well, I think all depends on good governance by the Iraqi government. The problem is the Iraqi government is not mending its ways. The problem is the Iraqi government is ruling. Mr. Nouri al-Maliki is like a democratic dictator. This is the problem. Unless there is you see the trend, the problem when I ask our people in Baghdad, they say we're getting help from the American army on the ground, but the problem is there is no American political pressure on the Iraqi government because they say we have no other choice. And this is the problem in Iraq. It's the choice. They don't have any other choice. Unless you put pressure, political pressure on the Iraqi government in order to include all Iraqis in the political process, not just by what do you call, like it's a decor. No, they have to taking part in the Iraqi government and the rebalancing of the Iraqi ministries. Now there is an ethnic cleansing in Iraqi ministries and it's all being carried out by the Prime Minister. So unless, as I said, there is a political pressure with military pressure, we will not have, we will probably have an American army in Iraq for another 20 years if things stays as it is now.
Well, I think you have to take a look at what, and Dr. Carafano really hit on a good point. Yesterday, over 300,000 Iraqis, both Sunni and Shia, signed a pledge that really spoke to the peace they were looking to have in mostly the southern part of Iraq, be dominated by Iraqi influences and not neighboring partners' influence, in this case Iran. And it really goes to the point of building up governance from the grassroots level and showing at both the provincial and the national level that the people are really bound by a single dimension, which is that the peace and the future they're looking for is disassociated from the militias and the ideology that came from Al-Qaeda. That's a positive step.
But the reality on the ground, Admiral, is different. This particular government
begin to understand that and reach out to the provincial areas and work to develop that kind of a feeling across Iraq.
But the reality is different also, Admiral. This particular government is, will rise and fall on the support it gets from the other ostensibly militias, whether it's Jaish al-Mahdi or Faylaq Badr or other people standing behind the government. Let me just remind you what an American general was quoted saying that our biggest problem in Iraq right now is the Iraqi government, al-Maliki government. So unless they open up and include others, I guess the American soldiers will be in Iraq for the next 20, 30 years, as Sabri said.
Well, I'm not a diplomat. I'm obviously a military man. My understanding of how we're working today to help the government of Iraq develop its capacity to lead from the national level, I think is very constructive, very supportive, and I think it's working in the right direction. Again, you've got to make certain that we give Iraq the chance to work through its own issues and come up with Iraqi solutions. These aren't American solutions we're going to offer.
strengthening the Iraqi government without really trying to reform the Iraqi government. And this is the problem here, because if you strengthen the Iraqi government with all its militias and with everybody, with all the corruption what's happening in Iraq, this is a problem. That's mean you will, you're preparing for the American forces to stay in large numbers in Iraq in order to pacify the effects of this government. And this is the main problem in Iraq. Yes, security is getting better, but the problem is the militias are lying down, the leaders have gone to Iran or to Syria. Unless there is a political reform in Iraq, goes tangible with the security, I don't think we will see peace in Iraq.
Well, I was going to say, I think they both hit on the key issue. Obviously, the long-term answer to peace and security in Iraq is not the U.S. military security forces, and having U.S. forces there in large numbers for a large period of time is actually a detriment to the process and not a benefit. But I think the real key here is, and this is, I think, what we'll have to see is the political pressure from Washington is not going to do it. I think that's a quixotic hope. The political pressure that's really going to change this has to be from the Iraqis, from groups coming up and pressuring this government. This government doesn't have to be there forever. They do have a democratic system. They can't force these guys out.
Let me differ with you, James Carafano. When the Bush administration gives al-Maliki the aura of democracy, that this country is playing by the books, we have lots of shared values, what incentive is there for al-Maliki to open up? What incentive does he have in order to, crack his whip and get rid of all these militias if President Bush is telling him, you are okay in my book?
Well, I don't disagree with you that the government in Baghdad is frankly part of the problem. But the question is what's going to fix that? And again, there's a balance here between what the United States can do and what the Iraqis can do. And I've argued really for over a year now that balance is shifting, and very much we're getting to a point where the future of Iraq is going to be in the hands of Iraqis, and not in terms of what somebody in Washington can do to pressure. I think the least important player in this process and the least influential player in this process is the guy sitting in Washington. It's the people on the ground in Baghdad that make the difference. Now, the U.S. military has done some of that. The Iraqis have done an awful lot of that. But the balance is shifting, and the future of Iraq is really dependent on what Iraqis do and less dependent about what somebody in Washington says.
The litmus test, Sabri, is the return of the Iraqi refugees. The estimate varies between 2.5 perhaps to 4 million in neighboring countries. You recently were in Baghdad. You told me when I invited you to this show that you saw a little bit of improvement in Baghdad. When do you think those 4 millions can come back? Will they ever trust what is going on?
It will be very difficult. You see, majority of those people are coming back for financial reasons because they cannot support themselves and they cannot really put their children into schools in Syria or Jordan. So it's a financial problem. The problem is, unless they have confidence in the Iraqi security forces, this is the major issue. They are not afraid from terrorists because everybody could die, either Sunnis or Shias in a car bomb. But the problem is, if they don't have confidence in the Iraqi security forces, I don't think people will come in large numbers into Iraq. And this is one of the major problems in Iraq. If you have Baghdad to left at, one of the Iraqi ministers who belongs to, I think, Nouri al-Maliki said Baghdad now is ethnically cleansed, only 15% of Sunnis left in Baghdad. So if this mentality continues, I think it will be very difficult to build up the peace, the shattered peace in Iraq. And the problem is, we could hear like, they want to strengthen the Iraqi government on the military side, on the security side, and they leave the rest for the weak Iraqis in order to reform the government. And this is very, very, wrong remedy. I think you have to put a parallel pressure, political, international political pressure on the Iraqi government at the same time when you are improving security in Baghdad. Otherwise, you will strengthen undemocratic government, and this is the problem.
Admiral Smith, Sabri mentioned the car bombs. Today, a big car bomb exploded in Baghdad in a pet market, killing 13 people. Most likely, this will continue for weeks and weeks, if not months and months. And yet, with that kind of atmosphere, how can we say that security in Baghdad, let alone the rest of the country, is improving?
Well, the fact is it is improving. The numbers of attacks are down dramatically, but we pointed that out. But we've also pointed out that this enemy is ruthless. Is desiring of one objective, and that is to turn back the clock of progress that has been made here in Iraq. Today's bombing was actually in a pet market. Obviously, loss of life was significant. And those are the kinds of attacks that this enemy, the enemies of Iraq, are trying to perpetrate to intimidate and turn back the progress. And we've forecasted that to be the case. We understand there will be days when the loss of life will dominate the news.
Let me
that's
go
going
to
be
Jim.
the way it's going to be.
Let me go to James Carafano for my final question. James, you are in Washington. You know Iraq has become a political football between the Democrats and the Republicans. By the time the conventions are underway, perhaps a clear decision might be made by the Pentagon to withdraw a substantial number of U.S. troops. Can the relative security remain as is with the reduction in American forces?
Well, that's the question, and there's the two answers to that question are: will the Iraqi security forces be able to stand up and shoulder the burden, and will Iraqis themselves take responsibility for their country? And the answer is we'll just have to see. I think that Sabri made the best point here. This is the real litmus test. Is you have 4 million people, and that's the ultimate form of democracy. They're going to vote with their feet. When those people start to come back in those countries in large numbers, then I think we'll really have an assurance that the country is moving in the right direction. So I think that's, if people are looking for something to watch for, I think that's the key metric. That's the key thing to focus on. And we'll meet again next year at this time, and I think we'll have a lot clearer answer than we do now.
You're on James Carafano, Fareed Sabri, Admiral Smith. Thank you for being guests on Inside Iraq. To access the show and to send us your comments, please go to aljazeera.net/English. We have reached the end of this show. Join me next week when we take another look inside Iraq. Goodbye.